Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to talk to all of you today. And the topic I wanted to cover is developing effective PM development equation. More commonly, it would be relationship, but I felt equation really represented the different balancing parameters you need to have. And this is a topic very near and dear to my heart as I've spent my time in both such roles. So, a little bit about myself. I was an engineer in my prior life. I've started in software development, and after my MBA, went into product management. And that's part of the reason I feel I might have some insightful things to share with you guys today, which might be helpful for you as you embark upon your journey as a product manager or as you grow in your role of product manager. And since I've done both the role of individual contributor as a product manager and a developer, as well as manage developers and product managers, I've seen few ways this relationship evolve and ways to make it more effective. So let's get to the topic. One thing to keep in mind, just as I always like to say before my presentations, is remember the elephant and the blind man tale, where depending on what part of the elephant a particular blind man was touching, they felt it was a tree trunk or something else. So point being, the perspective of a single person is always based on their own experiences. That may not be true in all the cases. So keep that in mind. So thinking about the product developer relationship, one of the things which is worth keeping in mind is just at a high level, what in my eyes has been the history of evolution of this role over time, right? And this is a highly simplified view of a much more complex and rich evolution, I would say. But for this talk, I felt these were some of the key milestones I wanted to highlight. So if you think about a product manager's role historically, and it has always been the case, although the title may not have been a product manager, it is about being the voice of the customer. And that role historically, even in tech or non-tech industries in the past as well, was done by marketing teams or some function of marketing teams, right? So that's where product manager role started in many places prior to what I call as digital technology prominence. And once digital technology came along, which is in actually both hardware as well as software, once those technologies came along, product manager role became a little bit more prominent because you really needed somebody who understands technology as well as some parts of the business to really act as a bridge between technologist and the business. And that's where I think product management role in my eyes started to formalize. And originally, at least the way I looked at the world, and I see probably late 90s, early 2000s, originally product management role wasn't really a formal title in many cases, but it was more oriented towards helping engineers complete their work. The problems in many cases were somewhat obvious. People understood what needed to be done, what could be done by technology at that time, and that's how product managers were really functioning with engineers. And around the same time, the focus was really around building very perfect solutions, because the lead time of actually coming up with an idea and getting it delivered as a product used to be long, especially in hardware industry. That probably is still longer, but in software also that used to be the case with on-premise world, where you would take probably 18 months or so to actually deliver your product release. So there was a lot more focus on making sure that on paper you come up with perfect solution, you come up with perfect requirements, you have the perfect spec and the perfect solution, at least on paper, because it was much more costly to change it after the fact. Because of that, what we traditionally called waterfall phase, product manager's role used to be a lot more extensive documentation, pixel perfect designs, having all permutations and edge cases covered. And that was a good role in terms of producing collateral. But again, the cost for business and effectivity of the solutions for the business started to be questioned, because by the time you think about an idea and when you deliver, it would be too late. And then obviously the world over, I would say after 2005, 2006, started to move towards what became popular as agile methodology, which is still popular, becoming more popular across all teams, including tech. And there, this is more of a cynical view to say, but still it is true in many cases. And I've seen this with many product managers, that the idea started becoming, just forget documentation. I do not like to do documentation at all. Actually, people became so complacent about this in some cases, especially product managers. And I was also guilty of this crime, where writing documentation was seen just as an overhead. It was best just to talk to people, explain them what you are thinking, and just keep moving on. So in the spirit of agility, partly we started moving towards this idea that we don't even have to think about the problem space properly and just get something done as quickly as possible. And that was all in the name of agile, which is an interesting pivot point to think about how product managers' role changed. Because previously they were doing a lot more collateral, which was like a formalized output. In Agile, it started becoming more conversational, more interactive, spending a lot more time with their development teams to really achieve this kind of success for your product, right? And this question started coming up in product managers' mind, and I think this is still true if you ask me, which was, am I a product owner or am I a product manager? And the difference, I'm sure if you guys will Google it, you will see product owner, at least the way I look at it in simplistic terms, means spending a lot more time really around the agile principles, agile process, being working with scrum teams, defining story points, managing that aspect. And product manager, as we said, historically it evolved from a marketing role, really is around focusing on the customer. And reality of this evolution is these evolution stages are continuing. They are not like one stage has come to an end. So product manager role essentially needs to do all of this. So why did I mention this history here, right? So if you think about the relationship and what we are trying to talk about today, about building an effective relationship, understanding this history is important, because this is a lot more, I would say, messy relationship where there are a lot of parts you have to balance. You have to take care of all these aspects where your role in agile world, being customer focused, all of that is needed. And you have to learn that aspect of trade-off, of balancing all these aspects in this relationship. So one, keep in mind that all these aspects are important. So if you don't enjoy, let's say, spending a lot of time balancing these kinds of aspects in the relationship, it is not always fun to be a product manager, to be in all honesty. But if you do enjoy that, you can also keep in mind that this history is going to inform the future evolution, and that would be a lot more incremental. So all these aspects will play out. Even if you had a great idea of changing the process, you have to think through how this has evolved over time to really come up with the best constructive and incremental evolution in the role. As you will grow and become leaders, I'm sure you will get those opportunities. So now that we know how the history is, the things which really define the need for this relationship is what would be worth looking at next. So what is the role of PM in this relationship context? Why do product managers exist? One of the core reasons why they exist, in my eyes, is always been making sure that you can connect the technology side of the house in a business to the business side of the house. Because ultimately it's the business stakeholders, whether it's leadership, sales, customers, prospects, marketing, services, support. All those folks are dealing with customers day in or day out on frontline, and they hear a lot of things, they discover a lot of stuff, and they want to funnel that to the technical team to actually get that implemented. To do that translation is one of the fundamental roles of a product manager. So being a bridge in that connection is the key part a product manager role has to have. The other aspect is around coordination. So really managing the work when it is in an execution phase, because you have to make those trade-off calls throughout your development lifecycle of a feature or a product, because you're not going to get everything. You don't have infinite resources. So a product manager really has to work closely with the dev team to make those trade-off calls in the best way to ensure that the feature value doesn't get diluted. And that coordination aspect is where you end up spending a lot of time. In my eyes, as I said in the product in the event briefing, 60% or more of your time is going to be spent in this process. And last but definitely not the least, it is about protection. So the goal of product manager is to really make sure that they can protect their technical people whose time is precious, because they have to work on things which really they can do well. That requires them to have uninterrupted time, and that will be only possible if product manager can shield them, especially from the noise and the pain, not from the glory. So share the glory, but really when there are things which are challenging, the conversations which are uncertain, making sure that you can act as a buffer, you bring that to the team in a more structured channel so that they don't get disrupted every 5 minutes. Those three aspects have to be done by a product manager on a constant basis. And it's interesting, I was just thinking about it today, that even if we are working from home, as is the case nowadays with the COVID situation, many places in the world, this becomes much more important. All these three aspects in the relationship between product manager and dev are still true and will be true no matter whether you're physically with them or not, right? You just have to spend a lot more time doing it nowadays, especially on your video call, Zoom, Google Hangout, what have you, right? So keep that in mind. So these are not things which change over time. These aspects will remain constant for product manager dev relationship. So now that we understand what are the three possible goals of this relationship, what are some of the effective strategies which at least I can share with you, which might help you in this regard? So if we think about building an effective PM dev relationship, I definitely believe that the foundational role or foundational element of that relationship is going to be mutual respect, right? And mutual respect really means that as a product manager, you know what your product team, your engineering team, or development team brings to the table. They are making some calls, and you know that they are making the best calls which are possible. Similarly, the engineering team has to believe the same thing, that the judgment calls product manager is talking about really are valid. The product manager can represent the team effectively, both to the outside world and bring the information from the outside world back to the product engineering groups in the right manner and accurate manner. The interesting part, which is what at least I learned over my years, especially transitioning from dev to product management, is it's actually easier for product engineering side of the house to gain respect, right? You're producing a pretty objective collateral, which is code or the actual product, and you can see much more objectively whether that is working well or not. On the product manager side, this is a little bit hard. So it is a little bit more about showing your judgment over time, building your insights, sharing those insights based on data, based on what you're hearing from the customers, and bringing it all together for the teams to understand it coherently. That are some of the aspects which you need to earn this mutual respect. So it is actually a little bit skewed in some way, and it will take some time typically for engineering teams to build that respect for product manager. That is just part of the territory, so you should keep that in mind. It is important, but it also takes time, and you should invest a lot of time because it is foundational for rest of the levels in this pyramid. Getting to the next level on what I think really matters, which goes hand in hand with mutual respect, is what I call as complete trust from outside view. So this one is interesting in my eyes because in general, I'm sure you will read up in all the blogs or multiple sources on the internet that, yeah, you should have a trusting relationship, not only between product managers and developers, but pretty much among all the relationships you need to have. The key thing here is complete trust, because ultimately when it is being looked at from an outsider's perspective, somebody who's not part of the team, and that could be within the company or outside of the company, if product management and development are standing in a lockstep together, and the team believes that the product manager is going to stand with them come what may, that goes a long way in making sure that all the things you want to influence the development team around, and all the things you probably want them to work on, they will have the faith and they will back you up in doing those. The reason outside view is also a critical word here is we should not use complete trust as a reason to stifle any kind of internal debates, arguments, and discussions. So many times what I see sometimes in product managers, and again, I've been guilty of the same things, you end up spending some time to make sure you don't make somebody upset, right? And that is in the process of earning trust. But that strategy backfires. What you really want to do is do not stop internal debates. Make sure you can challenge something which the engineering is proposing in the solution. They should be able to challenge your requirements to make sure that they actually make sense. And that is what business needs from you, because we want to make sure we spend the money and the resources in the most optimal way. So complete trust is needed, but that is more for the outside world. When you're going outside, once you've decided something, you stand together. But internally, have the need to do those debates. That's the way you actually make this relationship more effective. Moving on, treating dev as an early stakeholder. So this element in this relationship is important, especially more for the product managers to keep in mind. So many times developers obviously have requirements. They need to do some changes in the architecture, the infrastructure, maintenance of the application. They like to do things which require time and they will need some investment. And sometimes what happens is we get all focused on the shiny objects, which is typically what the market is looking for. And that's good. That is the role ultimately that drives the business. But we shouldn't forget that to run a long-term successful project, some of the concerns which engineering or development teams have are important to address. If a product manager can really make sure that just like they treat a customer or sales, similarly, they treat development as an early stakeholder input and make sure that their concerns are being addressed. A product manager can represent their concerns in the best way possible to the business and actually make a business case for them. That goes a long way in making this relationship really healthy, because then engineering is willing to go along with the product manager's calls in some of the features, because they know that the product manager really understands the whole spectrum about the business, including the technical details. So you don't have to understand all the technology, but you do want to get their concerns accurately represented and in the right priority, especially without needing any kind of intervention from leadership. Because if leadership tells you that this has to happen, of course, those things probably will happen in many businesses. But if you can be proactive about it, that's how you build that much more meaningful relationship with your development counterparts. So sort of a different end of the same spectrum would be choosing your battles wisely with the development team. So even if you do everything correctly and you're doing everything working collectively with the team and choosing the right stuff, reality of the business is such that you will end up in places where you made some calls, you all decided to work on a product or a feature, and through the course of time, maybe while it is still in development, you will realize that that feature actually is not really gonna work for customers, doesn't address the outcome you were hoping for. Now, this should be more of an exception than a norm, should be a rare event, but it will happen. And when it does happen, you have to really be sure that this is the point you want to raise with development team. Because at least in my experience, I had to go through this experience personally when I had to stop a project which was worked on by 25 to 30% of the engineering team for a year. And that project was still in works. A lot of time was spent by a lot of people on that. And when you stop such a project, which is not going to see light of the day, it's not easily accepted, especially for engineers who put their time and energy, so much energy onto this, right? So you have to be careful about choosing those battles, but for the sake of the business, the need of the business, you should do it. That is what your role is supposed to do. But when you do that, my few suggestions would be, remember to make sure that you are going off data, not just an opinion, to really make those calls. You are being empathetic but objective on why that call is being made, sticking to the point rather than people and opinion or some open-ended statements. And also managing your ego. So not letting some statements or potentially criticism you will have coming your way bother you. Don't take it personally. think about it more as something you need to mitigate for a while and be okay with those punches, right? And if you do that and can take the team over that difficult situation carefully and without causing too much drama, you end up in a situation that your relationship improves. So if you've actually been able to achieve that without requiring senior leadership to come into the picture and mitigate the problem, if you can actually collectively go back to senior leadership to make these things happen, that will go a long way in improving your relationship and making sure that even in such a situation, you made your relationship better with development. And the one which is really my favorite is, if you can do all the elements of this pyramid, which we talked about till now, this will help you from a selfish perspective, at least I believe, as you grow as a product manager in your career, you really want to get to the point that you can be a senior leader in the business or in the organization to drive the strategy. But to drive the strategy, you have to really think beyond what a product owner role typically means, which is managing the work. If you really have to think about strategy, you have to spend a lot more time outside with the customers, with the market, studying and analyzing the market, the trends, and all of that. You're not going to get that time, especially in the world of agile, as I talked about, unless you have established this meaningful and healthy relationship with your development team. Because if you have done all the pieces we talked about, and probably a few more depending on your situation, you will be able to spend more time thinking about the market problems. And you will still do the product owner's role, that won't go away, but your efficiency in doing that, doing those things will be better. Plus, there will be cases when the dev team or your development counterparts feel much more confident about what your opinion was going to be. And even if they make a call and you may not agree with them, they know you will back them up. In those cases, they're able to operate much more efficiently because you cannot focus on the market problems if your development team is saying they're not able to operate because you're not available, right? The prerequisite is your dev team should not feel that way. Once you do all these four things, you can make sure that they will not feel that way. And you can truly start thinking like a product manager. And I would say really controlling your career and your growth in your career. So if you essentially look at this pyramid and truly can take on the journey of achieving things on this pyramid, I do believe that relationship with development can become a lot more effective and a lot more fun in some ways and help you grow in your career as you would want as a product manager. And I always like to end with this quote, which I've said in my previous talks as well. A great product manager has the brain of an engineer, heart of a designer, and speech of a diplomat. Those skills are essential for any relationship, but especially this critical relationship with your development teams. Thanks a lot. I would be happy if there are any questions on chat. I will be happy to answer those. So thanks everyone for spending your valuable 30 minutes with us today. I really appreciate you hearing me out. I hope you will find this useful. And if it can help you in one small way to improve your relationship and your growth as a product manager, I will feel I've done my job. So thank you again and have a great day.